Hello again, this is your second video for the evening of 10-7 and 10-10. We're going to talk about midpoint and bisect. Midpoint is the point in the middle of a line segment. Given B is the midpoint of AC, prove that segment AB is congruent to segment BC. You'll notice that you have the statement given for the very first time. When you see this, it is the first thing you write in your proof. You write BMP midpoint AC. Now, I'm trying to prove that AB is congruent to BC. Because B is the midpoint, and the midpoint is the point in the middle of a line segment, I can say that AB is congruent to BC, and it's very simple because of definition of midpoint. The definition of midpoint says these two pieces are congruent. You're going to use this a lot in your proofs, so you don't want to lose it or misplace it. Let's apply this to an actual triangle. Here we have two triangles, MNP, QRP. Given P is the midpoint of NQ. Make sure when you're reading your givens you mark them. P is the midpoint of NQ. That is the very first thing we write. P midpoint NQ. And the reason is given. After I have written that, anytime I write midpoint, my next reason is always definition of midpoint. Because P is the midpoint, I know that NP and QP will be congruent. So that's what I write. Side NP is congruent to side QP because of the definition of midpoint. What else do I see? I see two other segments that are marked. So that is MP congruent to RP, and that is given again because it was marked already. There's something else that is congruent that we've talked about in class. Anytime you see this bow tie, there is a congruency every single time. What is that congruency? If you said vertical angles, you are correct. If you did not, every day now you will say bow tie means vertical angles. I have to name this with three letters. Angle, NPM, congruent to angle, QPR. What you saw is me checking to make sure I listed my letters in order, and that is because of vertical angles. Therefore, triangle N is congruent to triangle Q because of blank, blank, blank. If you said side angle side, you are correct, and good job. I want you to look at this next one and try it on your own, pause the video, and then play the video after a few seconds to see if you got it right. The first thing you wrote was your given. R is the midpoint of segment LQ. And since you wrote midpoint, the next thing you write is definition of midpoint. Since R is the midpoint of LQ, that means LR is congruent to QR. I have other givens here and here. side LM is congruent to side QM, and that one's given. Now there's something else that I've just recently learned about that is congruent that I see right now. This line, this segment. Segment RM is congruent to segment RM because of the reflexive property. Therefore, triangle N is congruent to, oops, I forgot to tell you what to prove. Triangle L is congruent to triangle Q, haha, because of blank, 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 side, side, side. So there's that again. Remember, you can use your notes on the warm-up when I see you in class next time, so take really good notes. We're just going to talk about bisect, and then we're done. Bisect means to divide into two equal parts. I have an angle that is split with a ray. I am given that XY bisects WXY. Whoa, bad, Miss Meyer. That's XZ. There we go. XZ bisects WXY. I need to prove that these two angles are congruent. The first thing I do, of course, is write my given. XZ bisects WXY. I just want to point out for a second that bisect and midpoint look pretty similar. They are cut in half. Bisect is cut in half. Midpoint is cut in half. When I bisect an angle, it divides into two equal parts. So, angle WXZ is congruent to angle YXZ, definition of bisect. By the way, you can't have a midpoint of an angle. Angles do not have midpoints. Angles can only be bisected. Let's look at this example. We have a given segment BD bisects angle ADC. What should you do with that? If you said write it at the very top of your proof, you are correct. So number one, BD bisects angle ADC. I'm going to make sure I mark this. There's the bisector, and here's the angle that's being bisected. There's my given. Just like with midpoint, if you use bisect, the next statement is always definition of bisect. When I bisect my angle, I create two congruent angles. Angle ADB is congruent to angle CDB. And that reason is because I bisected it. Let's see, what else was I given? I was given something else, a marking that was already on my image. AD congruent to CD. Mark, mark. There's one more thing that is congruent that you've seen about 3 times just in these 2 videos. What else is congruent? DB is congruent to DB. And that's the good old reflexive property. Am I done? No, I have to prove something. So I'm going to prove triangle A is congruent to triangle C, and that is by blank, blank, blank. Very good. Have all those notes ready for next class. Remember, you can use your notes on your warm-up.